TGIF, welcome to another edition of Navigate B2B. I am your host. My name is Steve Ferreira, and I'm CEO of Ocean Audit, a global ocean freight post-audit and now pre-audit consultancy company in Hartford, Connecticut. So great to be here. And wow, talk about a great 10 days of Global Supply Chain Week on FreightWaves TV. Fantastic production. Glad to have so many of friends and visitors, clients all around the world participating. It's exactly what we needed. A virtual free supply chain conference for the maritime and global logistics industry. Home run, and look forward to many more to come. Great news on jobs. February's job report looks great. Hopefully, as we open the market now, and well, it's been open a minute now, we have some great news to report probably on Wall Street today, and I'm sure that'll make a lot of people happy. A lot of my clients from the retail side have had great looking numbers, and I'm really enthusiastic about the reopening of America. There are so many things to talk about in a short 30-minute show today, so let's try to get started right away. I've been so pleased to be a big part of the great dialogue and discourse within the global ocean freight logistics and maritime segment that we've had the last several days on FreightWaves. As a matter of fact, you can still watch all the great segments that so many talented people produced and hosted, and especially the great talent that we have out there providing services to the men and women and the logistics providers and service providers at shippers and beneficial cargo owners everywhere. And you can watch those replays at tv.freightwaves.com. Now, I thought The Bachelor has it, 90 Day Fiancé has it. Why don't we do a recap show? Okay, partly recap show and partly some breaking and really important news for the ocean maritime industry in the second half of today's Navigate B2B. So let's get started. I'd like to recap some of the more exciting interviews that I personally did with some of the newsbreakers and game-changing service providers and entrepreneurs that are out there in the marketplace. So as we talk about the Global Supply Chain Ocean Maritime Conference that we held at FreightWaves, I'd like to talk about one of my initial guests, SANNE MANDERS, the Chief Operating Officer of Flexport. Now, it was such a joy to have a great session with SANNE as we talk about the future of service contracting and incentive or enhanced service contracting, performance-based contracting. I really enjoyed what SANNE had to say about Flexport's order management capabilities and his outlook in general about moving the ball forward for beneficial cargo owners that are in his domain. So it was a really good take on a nice, innovative approach from a C-level leader that gets on a company that hits a lot on the optics. So really, really an important session. If you can take a look at that session I did with SANNE, I think you'll really understand some of the nuances that that SANNE was promoting in enforceable or performance-based contracting. My next guest that I had a terrific time with was Duncan Wright of UWL. Duncan is such a magnificent fellow that just salt of the earth, organically growing his business at UWL, an American-owned freight forwarder, distribution company, warehousing, NVOCC, freight forwarding. And I like Duncan's down-to-earth nature in terms of how he presents the opportunities and features a way to solve problems for the beneficial cargo owners out there. So it was really, really pleasing to have him on the show, and I encourage you to watch that interview. The next guest that I had was a really great friend of mine, you could almost say a brother of mine, John Monroe. And John Monroe is CEO and president of John Monroe Consulting. and Worldwide Logistics U.S. representative. And John is like me, a 30-plus year. We should probably be honest, John, and say 40 years, but that's coming up close, my friend. Plus veteran of global maritime solutions. So we've seen it all. We've seen the slow nature of change in the maritime industry. And John and I have tried to become big proponents of change, positive change for the beneficial cargo owner. So John has a great niche in not only working and expanding the role of NVOCC footprint with his role at Worldwide, but also his own style of consulting and the unique brand and image that he brings forward is always customer centric and solving the problem, rather than just being part of the news. So my hat's off to my brother in arms, John Monroe. We had a great segment, and I definitely encourage you to watch that. And if you're just tuning in, again, TGIF, welcome to Navigate B2B. I am your humble host, Steve Ferreira of Ocean Audit, and we're just recapping Global Supply Chain, Ocean Freight Maritime Conference Week. And the next guest that I had on was really a great guy, kind of the horse whisperer of talent in the industry, Bill Paul, Logic Talent. Bill is a NVOCC freight forwarding veteran that now is in the recruiting game. And I think certainly one of the reasons why I wanted to have Bill on, not only is he talented and his team is talented, but I think that the face of employment, as you can see with today's employment numbers, talent is really, really going to be a crucial issue, a game-changing issue for 2021. And you can't miss the interview because Bill is really centric to the freight forwarding industry. And as I said, we're trying to build upon here, and the theme that I've done on my interviews is that, hey, I love ocean carriers, no question, but freight forwarders and VOCC is 50% of the equation. We really need to kind of, promote, or not promote that, but bring that up to the same level that the attentions of a Maersk or Hapag get. And speaking of a Maersk or Hapag or any of the carriers, my next guest was Gordon Downs, CEO of NYSHEX, the New York Shipping Exchange. Now, I think Gordon is great, and he's just done so much and has received so much series round funds and funding, seed money and Series A funding and beyond, and taking NYSHEX to a really interesting place in the ecosystem of ocean freight enforceable contracting, two-way enforceable contracting. And I always say, I think, while ocean vendor spot rates are great, I think that having a product like NYSHEX fits a very sweet spot in a lot of niche industries. And frankly, there's been a lot of talk about exports not getting the space on the ships because of Containergeddon. By the way, I think that's a term I coined. And how Containergeddon has mitigated exports because all the ocean vendors want to send empties back to Asia. And, so somebody like NYSHEX, if you're an agricultural exporter and, you really want to make that big sale and it's a niche, I think NYSHEX contracts work both for import, export. So I think Gordon has represented himself really, really well as another niche opportunity. I think my next guest, Stephanie Loomis, Vice President of Full Container Services at Vanguard, is another example of the types of niches that I love to apply within the ocean maritime world. Stephanie is a 30-plus year veteran as well, although she hasn't aged a year. And hey, Stephanie. And I think that one of the neat things about a company like Vanguard, it's really an interesting contrast because Vanguard is a great FCL player, and they've also done really well in LCL. And I think as you start to look at American recovery and reopening, it's always the hope of people like myself in the maritime industry that the 5 and 10 container customer a year becomes the blossoming giant of 100 and 200, or perhaps the Pelotons of tomorrow. So I think it takes leaders like Stephanie to accentuate and find and fine tune in the lay of the land, and plying her trade, the clients out there that make the most sense. And Stephanie's done a great job outlining some treaties on LinkedIn about the 3 or 4 things that you should do in looking at contracting this year. So my hat's off to Stephanie LOOMIS at Vanguard. My next guest really kind of was really interesting to segue into a later episode with Gary Vee. But Tom AUGENTHALER, CEO of 551 Media, was, I think next to SANNE or along the same lines, probably the most intelligent, Harvard educated. SANNE did Columbia MBA. Tom's a Harvard MBA or Harvard MA, excuse me, Tom. And Tom is a really interesting talent and one of the top 50 influences in the social media trade. And Tom has really done well in helping you to find your niche in a vertical market. So, as I said, I think we need to find leadership and being an influencer in these trades in container shipping. I was telling somebody the other day that one of the things that's interesting about being an influencer in shipping is I think I did a study on LinkedIn, and I think there's 100,000 plus, maybe even more, men and women in logistics and supply chain shipping on LinkedIn, as an example. And I would say 10 of us, 15 of us post regularly and publish content. And that's way too little, right? And I admire people like Tom, and we'll talk about Gary in a second, that help people make those connections within themselves to not be fearful of publishing out content. My next guest, what can I say? Jack CONAGHAN, logistics director at AutoZone, one of the most educated, polished guys in the import industry. I've known Jack for 20 plus years. Jack has a strong retail background. And if there is networking to be done in terms of like talking within them, amongst yourselves, Jack is a connection that you definitely would want to make on LinkedIn, because I look at him as one of the deans of connectivity in the industry, both from the old guard and the new guard perspective. So I never miss the opportunity to pick up the phone to call Jack, even if it's on a weekend, to bounce something off him. We have that kind of relationship, and so my hat's off to Jack and AutoZone. You got a good one there, and I think it's making an immediate difference in terms of the receptivity of how AutoZone is increasing and becoming, the premier player in auto parts and resupply. So Jack has talked to you about his views on contracts, and I think it's so great that you see the theme that we built up here. And my next guest was really interesting because Lisa JASUTIENE in Geneva. I've known Lisa for a while. Lina, excuse me, Lina. 1,000 apologies. I practiced saying your last name, but I botched your first name. Lina JASUTIENE at RICUPEX. Lina is a trained lawyer, attorney for 20 plus years, PhD, and she does a great job helping clients and shipping and forwarding companies navigate the complex world of cargo claims and cargo claims remediation. So Lina, hats off to you for helping to outline another niche. And I think Lina's role is so important because the last thing that any CFO wants is to overpay or have an overspend situation. So in some ways, Lina's business on cargo claims is not all dissimilar to my business at Ocean Audit on ocean freight refund, recovery, and cost avoidance, because CFOs are a finicky group. And I think one of the really interesting things about recapping in totality the 10 or so guests that I interviewed on Supply Chain Week, Ocean Week, is that you can almost say that a CFO is a chief financial officer, but you can almost say that they're also almost akin to being the chief freight officer. And hear me out on my logic here. I think that when you look at the siloed environments that we have within logistics, one of the biggest problems or issues is that clients have not really addressed the whole. You hear a lot about is the Baltic Freightos Baltic rate this week, is the Shanghai Container Shipping Index rate. So we hear a lot about cost, and price, but we don't hear a lot about cost avoidance, right? And cost mitigation. And I think that when you look at the environment out there, the chief financial officer, I mean, the one thing they hate, right, is to overpay for anything. And I think that the men and women of our logistics environment are just the warriors of our reopening. Their hands are full with supply chain volatility and moving the product in real time. For example, I would hesitate. I would guess like that in cargo claims. We've seen 3 or 4 major incidents where containers are swept overboard, and millions upon millions of dollars are lost. And again, that goes back to insurance, and that goes back to protection. And there's always going to be somebody at the end of that swamp that gets burned, right? And that's something that no CFO wants to be in that situation. And so, like Lina and myself, our role or our business is to make sure that CFOs avoid those costs. And I was just thinking about what Lina does as an example, what I do. And we could actually make the argument to go out to the chief financial officer and say, hey, how would you like 50 containers free of charge, or how would you like one container of widgets that cost $100,000? How would you like to produce those at zero cost? And I think that when they come back and say, well, that's hypothetical, and I think that it's just so easy for professionals like Lina or myself or other people in the audit side to say, hey, this is real. We've talked so much about price. The amount of overspend out in the industry is so rampant that I have actually, even just myself this week, I mean, there are great, providers that do pre-auditing for domestic trucking and rail and air freight. But I said to myself, hey, I have to do something to stem the tide of these cost overruns for my clients, right? So I came up with this great concept. I call it vessel.voyage. It's actually a website where I actually just terminate the negative invoicing right there and then, correct it for the client free of charge, and send it back to the vendor, because clients shouldn't be paying overbilling when they're experiencing these type of cost overruns. So I think it's really interesting. So that's my take on kind of the global supply chain overview. I am leaving out Gary Vaynerchuk, and I think Gary Vaynerchuk and I, my interview with Gary was, what can I say? I could use accolades. It was a once in a lifetime event. It was fantastic. Gary is the type of person that is such a take charge person. I make the analogy that if I didn't control or wrangle a way to get him into that spot, where I could, take that interview control, Gary would have gone on for 30 minutes about the best baseball card that he ever collected, or his favorite play in the New York Jets history. So I think one of the things I learned about, interviewing somebody like Gary, you can make the analogy with your clients, right? Make sure that you know your stuff, you have a background on the person, you kind of have a soft and fuzzy about some of their background events of things that they've done. There's so many vehicles now to understand, where somebody is coming from or has been. And I think that when you see, I've never met Gary before, so he was always my dream interview. And thanks to FreightWaves, they made that happen for me. And I wasn't about to waste the moment. And so we had a terrific interview where in the interview itself, he had actually complimented me 3 or 4 times that, wow, nobody ever got that deep into it before with me. And that's what I want to have as the takeaway for everyone participating in the global environment that we're in. Because logistics is as Gary said, there has never been a better time to use social media and enhance personal branding and storytelling in the logistics, within the logistics industry. And that goes back to what I commented on a few minutes ago, that just so few of us, really do it. And, I think, Gary's philosophy, right, is just, take that one step. And, Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think, Tom Augenthaler would also argue that, it doesn't take much, right? You're already thinking along the lines that you should put out some content. that typically means that your skill sets in your discipline, whatever part of logistics or supply chain that you're in, is already good, right? And Tom says, hey, you're kind of an influencer already. Maybe not a macro or micro influencer, but you've got that innate quality or that innate being to do those things. And so, I look at Gary and I think to myself, holy cow, this guy's got a camera following him almost 24/7, really putting out great content. I mean, I could never be like that. And yet I'm a guy, I think that, hey, I put out a lot of great content. Sure, some falls flat on its face, but that's the point is that I've had more meetings and more organized conferences where somebody has recognized the content as being valuable, right? Or being part of something that they've taken away. And that's really all it takes to have that personalized connectivity to be that 1%er of providers that the client thinks about. I mean, when you think about it, ocean freight and logistics is a type of commodity, right? And the point I was trying to make with Gary is that he got started in the wine business, which is also a commodity. And by talking about, hey, would you know, this is a Pinot Noir, was where Napoleon's horse, this varietal was where Napoleon's horse grazed, the fields back in the 1600s. Sounds a lot better than, hey, what's the latest on sale, right? I mean, I'm just making an analogy. So I really enjoyed that, and I want to thank everyone at FreightWaves to make that content available to you. And I also want to thank the FreightWaves management team for making that interview available to me. The last thing that I would like to cover today is a landmark case. It's complex, and we don't have that much time, but I want to give you a lay of the land and help you navigate the landscape on this a little bit. Any more questions on it, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, Steve Ferreira, or Oceanada, steve.ferreira@oceanada.com. So I don't think this is going to come across a little egotistically, but I don't think there's another person in America that has served as an expert witness so many times, like myself, at the Federal Maritime Commission level. I think I've had 4 cases, all successful, where an issue on refunding or overpayment has not been resolved at the local or maritime steamship line NVO level. It's gone all the way up to the Federal Maritime Commission for a judge to decide the case. So I think I've been an expert witness 4 times, I want to say. And so I'm really watching every case that comes out of the Federal Maritime Commission like a hawk, just to see if there's any carryover that I can apply. Guess what? One came out 2 weeks ago that blew me away. And it's a landmark case. Now, in Federal Maritime Commission, there's 2 ways that you can petition for relief of refunding unjust charges, charges that don't comply with the Shipping Act. And it's a complex topic, but bear with me. So basically, there's something we would call small claims, I think it's under $2,500, and then larger claims over $2,500. And so one really surefire way to get the attention that, you want to petition for a refund on something that was unjust, and it's a low dollar value, you can go to small claims remediation center at the Federal Maritime Commission. And so the nice thing about that, right, is you get one small case passed. You might have, 100 other containers that would fall into that case. But the trick is to get the one case approved, so then you can then bundle all the other cases together, once you have the confidence that the case is approved. And so, one case was approved. Now, I was not directly involved in it, but I did read the case and the decision. And as I said, I believe it's one of the strongest. I believe that when this is more out in the public, this will shake one of the pillars of container shipping. And the topic is on equipment free time, container free time, with ocean vendors. And the complainant brought a case to the FMC that said, hey, we're paying, $100 a day or $200 a day. I don't think it was that much, but let's say it's $150 per diem, which is per diem is the amount of times, if you're allowed, say, 3 working days or 5 working days or, 7 calendar days of use of the ocean container once you pick it up from the port or, let's say, the rail facilities. So that's free time. So free time expires after a certain amount of days, and then you pay for the use of that container on a tariff-based rate or a negotiated rate, but usually a tariff-based rate. And so what the Federal Maritime Commission ruled in this petition is that the client said, hey, I shouldn't have to pay because, the terminal was closed on the weekend, right? And, normally, right, when you have the per diem charges, it's built in as calendar days. So that includes the weekends. So the Federal Maritime Commission, in a small, obscure ruling, said, no, we believe that this violates the Shipping Act, so you don't have to pay. And we're ordering the steamship line to refund the trucking company. So it was an incredible landmark decision. Now, per diem is extraordinarily complex. It has many tentacles to it. The billing is in the dark ages, and it is not for the faint of heart, right? It is a tough issue. So what I encourage you all is to take a look at perhaps how much you spent in per diem. I would usually recommend if you spent a couple $100,000 in these per diem charges, that you may want to consider speaking to an expert like myself or someone else about a way to potentially start petitioning or looking for refunds. Now, it's probably not the type of thing where you can just say, okay, I hear what Steve's saying. I'm going to run right to, steamship line XYZ. The chances are it won't go anywhere. You really need to, as I said, in this landmark case at the FMC level, which I'm experienced at, you need to look at it as taking a big step towards getting your own case blessed, I would say, at the small claims level. So I guess the way to think of it is almost like, maybe taking a leap of looking at a small claims court case, except this is ocean small claims court. So if there's one thing I've done today in the session is I wanted to make sure that I introduced that opportunity to you. And it's very strategic, and it's another it's another area of cost recovery that I believe are paramount and tantamount to your chief financial officer or chief freight officer's success, not only your success, because be a maverick and make sure you uncover and look at all these opportunities. I encourage everyone to go back and look at the tv.freightwaves.com replay. Please feel free to reach out to me if you need any assistance or guidance. And I want to thank you all for watching another great episode of Navigate B2B. I'm Steve Ferrari, your host from Hartford, Connecticut, and we'll see you next week on another show. Thanks, guys. Love you.